Before I get started, where's my Galaxy S8 review? Where's my LG G6 review? Well, the big American sites had these devices a week or two before even public availability, and I'm in a queue somewhere. Look, you read all about those. Let's try something different. I'll get to the S8 and LG G6 in time, and hopefully by then all the firmware updates and initial bug fixes will be out. In the meantime, here's something a bit different. Now, you all know I'm a big fan of big specs in small form factors. Think the Xperia Z range from Sony, and Huawei have been doing the same stuff. Now, I covered Emotion UI 5, Huawei's big new skin and OS interface a couple of shows ago. So this is all about the hardware. This is the P10. I looked at the P9 in Phone Show 277. This is a subtle shift in emphasis for the latest Huawei consumer flagship. The company has gone all out for the most profitable sector of the market, traditionally dominated by Apple with the iPhone. Here we have front-mounted fingerprint sensor and home control, rounded aluminium body that's almost indistinguishable from the iPhone 6s, plus a raft of cosmetic options, and a suitably iPhone-like bump up in price by over £100 from the P9. Which is not to say that the P10 isn't a good little smartphone, it is. It's just perhaps not the one you should choose unless fashion is your first priority. But more on that later. The price is the obvious talking point here, with the P10 selling for well over £500 despite specs which aren't really much better than those on the likes of the ZTE, Axon 7, OnePlus 3T and so on at £150 or more less. Can the iPhone-esque styling and colour options give Huawei a success story here? Now, there's no denying the build quality, which is as solid as the iPhone. Attention to detail on all corners and edges make the P10 super easy to hold, though also super easy to drop. As with the iPhone, a case is almost an essential first step, but then you don't get to see the colours or feel the metal, the usual fundamental flaw in modern smartphone design that I rant about all the time, taken to extremes by the Mi Mix I looked at in Phone Show 297, but also kind of a problem here. The 5.1-inch screened P10 is a lovely size for everyday use though. You can wrap your hand around it securely, perhaps in a thin TPU case, and it's just about possible to use the interface one-handed at a pinch. The display is gorgeous and optionally very bright. This is turned down here for camera purposes. It's 1080p and IPS Neo again like the P9, and I had no complaints about visibility. Gorilla Glass 5 should provide sufficient protection, though I was amused to see Huawei ship the P10 with a plastic screen protector out of the factory. It looks horrible and has been taken off here for the show. Underneath the protector there's no oleophobic coating, as on most other non-budget phones, though this has recently been addressed and currently shipping P10s apparently. It's worth checking the one you're buying ahead of time. Although the bottom bezel seems artificially large, again think iPhone design and top-bottom bezel symmetry, all is not as it seems, since the P10 has a huge trick up its sleeve. Rather than only using virtual Android controls, which take up screen real estate, and you can do that here, there's also the option to use the new navigation key, i.e. the fingerprint sensor, which now doubles as a back, home and recent apps control, and it works brilliantly. Tap once for back, tap and hold for home, swipe for recent apps, and you'll find you can ditch the on-screen default controls altogether, meaning more room on the display for your applications to show content all the time. Yes, there's a short learning curve while you adapt to the new system, but trust me, it only takes minutes and you'll be enjoying a bigger and more immersive Android experience. Around the sides and bottom of the P10 are some nicely tactile power and volume buttons, a welcome 3.5mm headphone jack, not always a given now. Sadly, a grill for the mono loudspeaker, which is decently loud and of good quality. Here's a demo. It's full volume. It's fine for sat-nav and speakerphone calls. I wouldn't watch a movie using this speaker for my audio. There's also a USB Type-C jack capable of receiving up to 4 amps at 5 volts from the supplied or any compatible charger. This works very well indeed with the internal 3200 mAh battery, not always able to cope on a day of heavy use. So 15 minutes fast charge before heading out for the evening should get the phone through to bedtime easily. It's also worth noting there's no waterproofing here on the Huawei P10. This isn't a given on any smartphone, of course, but you kind of expect it once you get above £500 and into flagship pricing tiers. After all, If you drop the P10 into a puddle or a sink, you're out of pocket massively. Well, you can accept the lack of waterproofing on a £150 Wiley Fox budget handset, just buy another one, at worst case. I'm sure this isn't the first smartphone to feature this, but I did note that the positioning chip under the hood here supports the new and upcoming European Galileo satellites, in addition to the existing American GPS, the GLONASS and the BDS arrays. The positioning power we have in our phones in 2017 is extraordinary. I remember sitting in an open field in 1995, waiting 20 minutes for a fix and getting very excited. Now you can be located in a second or so anywhere on the planet in a device that's 100 times smaller and with 100 times less power consumption. That's 20 years of progress. Up at the top on the mainly metal back is a glass section covering plastic for some of the RF aerials, and with the imaging hardware, twin cameras, both with f/2.2 apertures and, in theory, OIS, one with a 20 megapixel monochrome sensor and one with a 12 megapixel RGB sensor, plus dual LED, two-tone flash and a small window for the laser autofocus. There's the usual Leica branding, though I'm not convinced of the extent of the camera maker's involvement. Results are okay in good light conditions. See the samples here. The monochrome sensor is supposed to add extra contrast and detail into colour images, and it kind of now does, though you have to pixel peep to see any difference. Low light shots, though, are consistently disappointing, thanks in no small part to that smallish aperture, but also because of the overzealous noise reduction algorithms. The P10's camera is incredibly fast at taking photos, so fast in fact that it's a problem by default. If your thumb lingers on the capture icon for even a tenth of a second, you get a burst of photos, usually not what you want. Happily, albeit slightly confusingly, there's an option in camera's settings to assign a long press to the capture icon to focus, and this worked much better in my tests. So of course, you then have to toggle it back to re-enable burst for the school sports day, and so forth. As with previous Huawei dual camera phones, there's a software-derived wide aperture mode, taking a range of shots very quickly at different settings using both cameras, and then letting you combine them to order to simulate differently focused low depth of field photos. This works fairly well, though the results do always kind of look artificial, and purists would rather get up close to their subject and perform a bokeh the traditional way. Both the rear and front-facing cameras have portrait and beauty modes, providing artfully blurred backgrounds beyond anything in the 1 metre field of view, plus beautification of skin blemishes in the usual Huawei way. These work surprisingly well, as you can see here. Video captures are up to 4K and can be stabilised in two ways. The OIS is always on, plus there's software stabilisation as well. Put the two together and the footage is truly Steadicam-like. Impressive in good light, though the low f/2.2 aperture does make for noisy footage in lower light conditions. The captured audio is stereo too, making the P10 great for general video work, though perhaps not in a live music scenario where you often find both low light and high volumes, which will overload the general purpose Huawei microphones here. Performance for apps and games on the Huawei P10 was stunning, or at least up with other 2017 flagships, with no lag at all thanks to a Kirin 960 chipset and 4 GB of RAM. I won't go into EMUI 5 all over again. I covered it in detail, gory detail, in Phone Show 304, so go watch that. Suffice it to say that Emotion UI 5 is a big step forward for Huawei and Honor phones generally, and works really well on the P10 here. There are two slight clouds over the P10 though, and they're of Huawei's own making. You see, they also announced the P10 Plus. This brings in a 5.5-inch QHD display for only 8mm extra on the phone. And the Plus model has extra storage and RAM options, a main camera with much larger f/1.8 aperture and a 3750 mAh battery. Now, the Plus is slightly harder to find for sale and is well over £100 more expensive, but it's undoubtedly the better option if you can find the cash. Secondly, the existing P9 from last year has also now received the EMUI 5 update, and the P9's not far off half the P10's price, yet with very similar specs. So you'd have to really want the colour options or the new navigation key system. But either way, Huawei gets your money, I guess, and the P10 is a decent little smartphone. Yes, it's overpriced, but buying it on contract should fix that. Yes, it's far too similar to the iPhone in styling, but the coloured variant should at least add some unique flair. The P10 is a very capable little Android smartphone in its own right and deserving of your attention if how a smartphone looks is as important to you as how it performs. This is the Huawei P10.